What if the resurrection of Jesus Christ isn't just a faith claim, but a historical one? Did something actually happen after the crucifixion that forced even skeptics to change sides? Why did a persecutor like Paul the Apostle suddenly become Christianity's greatest advocate? And are the resurrection accounts evidence of a real event or just powerful visions and evolving stories? Well, tonight, we're going to lay it out. My friends are going to help me do it. And then you can decide whether or not the evidence points to a risen Jesus or something else entirely. And that's coming up on the next Mount Hermeneutics. You're listening to Mount Hermeneutics, where three Marines give their perspective on God, faith, and spirituality with a heavy lean on the divine council worldview. This is not your grandma's Sunday school, nor is it always for the Christian faint of heart. Nothing about who we are or what we say make us experts. But you better believe we'll have a take, and perhaps it won't suck. Oh shit. Color me impressed, Negro. Brian, no means no. Remember that Mount Hermeneutics is free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. And if you're watching us on YouTube, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I mean, you're already watching, may as well subscribe. And hit the like button. Do us a favor there. Even leave a comment. We might even read them. If it's your first time with us, I am Andre. That's Matt. It's Brian. Fellas, what's happening?
What's up?
When you said Paul the Apostle, it sounded like you said Paulie Apostle.
I thought
And
the
I
same thing.
and I felt like he was like a Sopranos character or something, like Paulie
I
Walnuts.
I was thinking Burt Ward. I was thinking like he's Hector and Rocky for a job. Peter.
Burt Young.
Hector and Peter for a job because
Yeah.
I just now made that connection that Rocky is Peter in this analogy because
Nice. Nice work, Brian.
yeah,
So you want to get in some rapid fire?
Let's do
let's
it.
do it.
Okay.
Lightning round.
Did Jesus Christ actually die by crucifixion?
Yes.
Yes.
Did the resurrection belief emerge immediately or develop over time?
Overtime.
Immediately.
Did the earliest followers genuinely believe they saw the risen Jesus?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is sincere belief enough to establish truth?
No.
No.
If it were, men could have babies.
Fair. What best explains, shortly, I know this is an essay question, explains the conversion of Paul the Apostle from persecutor to preacher?
Aliens.
I'll go with that.
Very well. Does this transformation point to a real encounter or a psychological experience?
That, I mean, from the outside in, it could be either.
I think you would need more on its own. It's wide open. That it's been corroborated by the other disciples narrows it quite a bit to aliens.
Was the tomb actually empty, or is this a historically uncertain
It
thing?
was empty.
Yeah, empty.
Would an empty tomb alone prove a resurrection?
No.
No,
Are visions or hallucinations enough to explain the resurrection appearances?
No.
no,
Is a natural explanation more reasonable than a miracle?
no.
Like not even close.
Well, I
I laugh at my
I
wording on that because a miracle and natural like are really
Right.
different. Yeah,
well, let me put it this way: a natural explanation does not account for the data,
I like
and
it.
therefore, yeah,
What best explains the rise of Christianity? Resurrection or something else?
resurrection.
Yeah, I
Matt?
agree. I was trying to think about what something else would be. Because if you're giving me Tiger or the field, I'm like, well, who else is in the field?
Right. Does your worldview determine your conclusion before you even look at the evidence?
Yes.
Indeed.
And that concludes lightning round. So, Was this a historical event, or is this in the minds of all the Sky Daddy worshippers, Brian?
Brian.
At, say that again.
Did this happen? Did Jesus die and resurrect? Did he come back?
Oh,
Is he
heck,
risen?
heck yeah, I did.
Do we have historical evidence for that?
We have certain historical facts that are incontrovertible, and
Incontrovertible. Big
they're
word.
incontrovertible. And I deliberately choose that as absolute unqualified language as possible, just to invite people to try to disprove it.
To controvert it.
Yeah, because if I'm wrong, it should be super easy to shut me off by controverting it, but you can't because I'm right. So from those facts, the central fact is that Christianity exists in the world because the original disciples of Jesus traveled around the Mediterranean world claiming to have collectively, repeatedly, and empirically encountered him alive again after his public execution and burial. That itself is a fact, and it's incontrovertible from the evidence. From that
So hang
fact,
on. Let's let that simmer for a second because I think that's worth being sure that we're all grounded on.
well,
So
let me.
I just want to say again what you said. I'm not gonna take us off on a tangent. I just want to re-say it.
Okay.
So you're saying that Christianity exists because all these people that we loosely call the disciples
Yeah.
spent the rest of their lives, however short or long they were, and we'll
About
get into
40
that.
years.
We'll get into that, right?
Yeah.
Professing that this man that was publicly crucified, executed by the Roman government, died on the cross, was buried, and then he came back to life. And this is a fact that cannot be argued, no matter how much a person wants to argue that fact. The things that I just said very specifically are true.
Well, to be precise, it can and often is argued,
Well,
but it's typically argued from ignorance and misinformation,
it
which
can't be disproven.
right.
Yeah, that's fair.
Um,
I get the way you're saying that.
yeah.
Anybody can argue anything,
Yeah.
but I can say the world's not round, and
Yeah,
others do. Yeah,
you can indict a ham sandwich, but
sure.
yeah.
You can exhume the corpse of a dead pope and have a trial and sentence him to death and excommunicate him.
Heck yes, you can.
Yeah,
That's an oddly specific example, but
because it's happened.
yeah. So yeah, there from that that's where Christianity came from because this claim was made. Um, and the claim itself has certain features that, as we'll get into, make it difficult to write off in the usual kind of thought terminating cliched ways that people do. From that fact, it absolutely necessarily logically follows that one of three explanations has to be true for the existence of that fact. Um, First is that they lied about it, as people are wont to do. People lie all the time about empirical experiences. They believed it, but they were somehow honestly mistaken, or it actually happened. Um, one of these must be true. Only one of them can be true because they're mutually exclusive. Applying the rules of logic, if we can eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And as we go through each option, we find that the conspiracy theory option that they lied about it, um, we could if we were to posthumously put them on trial for the crime of fraud for lying about the resurrection, there is sufficient evidence to prove they had neither motive, means, nor opportunity to lie about the resurrection. For option two, in 2,000 years, no plausible scenario has ever been proposed for how they could have honestly believed they had this collective, repeated empirical experience of the same events, but been mistaken about it. When you get to option three, we find that the only reason to rule it out is if we bring a prior anti-supernatural bias to it. People tend to skeptics tend to say things like, "Well, you have to prove that God exists before option three is plausible, and if until you can do that, resurrections just don't happen." Well, no, you're assuming atheism as your starting point against the evidence. You have to account for this fact. If the first two options don't account for it, you can't just default to the third anyway and remain an honest, honorable person. You're bypassing the debate. You're not addressing it. And so you would have to prove atheism first in order to maintain option three as a tenable explanation in light of the implausibility of options one and two. So basically, based on the facts that we have before us, if you follow the logic, you have no choice but to either conclude that God exists and that he raised Jesus from the dead and he is therefore the Messiah, thereby validating the overall biblical narrative that foretold him, or you have to take a blind leap into absurdity and cling to that absurdity for dear life, which most people can't do. Most people they'll have to either pile on lie after lie after lie to avoid it, or they carry that rock around in their shoe. So the most common tactic is to deny the facts themselves, and that's so you get this alternative narrative that that refuses to die. It gets presented as the informed scholarly position that the idea of the resurrection is the product of legendary embellishment over time, which has to create this entirely different paradigm for where Christianity came from that ignores all of the evidence. And so if this were like a court trial, that would be my opening statement. Um, so I leave it to the prosecution, Your Honor.
So let me, Brian. You said a bit. I just want to restate it all. I want to keep this as in front of us as possible.
Okay.
So you said there's three primary outcomes. Either they lied about it, they were mistaken, or what was the third one?
It happened.
Okay.
Yeah. And if that sounds familiar, this is essentially C.S. Lewis's trilemma. This is the Lord liar lunatic argument, but that's really kind of a universal argument for anytime anyone makes a claim to empirical experience. Muhammad said an angel came to him in a cave. Joseph Smith says the angel Moroni came to him, or God the Father and Jesus in bodily form. Aliens abducted me. My garden gnomes came to life and talked to me. I saw Bigfoot. In any of it, the same kind of trilemma applies. Either the person's lying, they're they're crazy or impaired or something, or it actually happened.
Okay.
Hmm.
And there's not a fourth. And I haven't given this a lot of time myself. So no one's ever presented a fourth option?
Um, well, the only fourth option is the aforementioned legend option, but that's actually a cheat. It doesn't really deal with the facts. It tries to rewrite the facts. Um,
Hmm.
and the fact is, the original disciples of Jesus made this claim. This wasn't something that developed over time as
It's
they,
not like the Knights of the Round Table and King Arthur kind of thing
yeah,
where
or,
there's no firsthand evidence of it. It's just some story that's been talked about for so long that nobody knows where it came from.
yeah. And
How do how
people,
do how do we know that they made that claim early and often?
um,
So a lot of skeptics will say um, there's sources and there's early sources, but still every source is Christian and interested sources.
So
yeah,
And
you're
many
saying
many
where's
of the
the
people that wrote at the time that were contemporaries of this movement didn't really talk about it.
so you're talking about like extra biblical evidence?
Right. Well, historical evidence, right?
Yeah.
There was a lot of record keeping going on in that time, especially by Rome. There was a lot of people that wrote.
Um, well, what writings we do have surviving from Rome, they corroborate the general Christian timeline. None of them contradict it, but the earliest writings would be Paul's letters. And we could, and again, I recognize the skeptical claim, well, that's the Bible. You can't quote the Bible to prove the Bible. Um, and I agree that the way that a lot of Christians do that, well, the Bible is the word of God, and so if God said it, then it's true, and that proves it. That's not what I'm talking about here. You could approach Paul's letters for the sake of argument. Let's presume atheism. Let's presume that Paul is a fraud. That he like we don't. But what Paul's letters reveal is that first of all, you do have this international community, this network of communities throughout the Mediterranean that kind of piggybacks off of the Jewish diaspora. And these people were in regular contact with each other. Um, Before Christianity started, you've got the Jewish diaspora, you have all of these Jewish communities throughout the Greek-speaking world. And we read in things like the Book of Acts or in the Gospels or in Josephus or Philo of Alexandria, any writers about from and about the Second Temple period of Judaism, the time in which Jesus lived, you did have this regular travel and correspondence back to Judea. You had pilgrims going to the Holy Land for major festivals. You had people carrying news back and forth about the home country by word of mouth, by letter. And you see this reflected in Paul's letters, wherein the original disciples of Jesus were visiting synagogues throughout the Mediterranean world, delivering the news, and like open Paul's letters at random, and he's typically writing, hey, so and so from Antioch says, sends their greetings to so and so, and I'm with Timothy, and he says hi and hey, remember to remind this guy to bring my parchments when he comes to visit me. And you get this sense that you're kind of peeking into a larger world where it's not just Paul writing shouting into a void. He's writing to real people about real people, and so they're in regular communication. So you have that, and then you have things like in First Corinthians, chapter 15 is probably the most salient example of this, where he says, "Now, brothers, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel you are saved, if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. Otherwise, you have believed in vain. For what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance." That's the language, that's the formal language of received rabbinical tradition. Like rabbis would pass on their teachings orally, and their disciples' whole vocation was to memorize it, and then they would pass it on to their disciples when they were rabbis. And so the traditions were typically arranged mnemonically for easier memorization. What follows next fits that pattern. And so scholars think that the verses that follow, these were not Paul's words. This was an early Christian creed that had been institutionalized prior to Paul, which Paul himself received from some senior members of the church, presumably from Cephas, i.e., Peter, and or James, the Lord's brother, when he visited them in Jerusalem shortly after his own conversion, but it was
Can I,
within about 3 years.
can I pause
But
you right there?
sure.
So there's also Paul commenting that he did not receive from men, he received it from Christ himself. So with that said, if he is passing on in this rabbinical tradition and he is making the claim that it is Christ himself that gave him this to pass on, therefore it is his gospel, it's Jesus' gospel, and presuming that Paul is a fraud, and I'm not claiming that he is this
No,
time.
let's
Right.
presume that for the
Okay,
sake of
yeah.
argument here.
So
Permission to treat him as a hostile
if
witness, Your Honor?
if that's true, then Paul becomes the source of himself, and then these people are believing what Paul is telling him, and that doesn't prove an early tradition. I mean, it proves that somebody told them what to believe, and then they believed it, but
Yeah.
it doesn't create eyewitnesses, is what I'm saying.
Well, let
Well,
me get to that. Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
yeah.
Go ahead, Matt.
I was going to say two things. One is the I find it interesting. Well, I understand the atheist perspective to say you can't use the Bible to reinforce the Bible, right? Like I get that. I get that as a logical statement. But here's what I feel like is misunderstood about the Bible is that neither Matthew nor John nor Peter or Paul or any of them when they were writing their books to the extent that they were writing books in real time, but however these books came to pass, nobody was writing them and then their buddy walked in and goes, "Hey, what are you doing, dog?" "Oh, I'm writing this book that's going to go in the Bible." Like the
Yeah.
Bible didn't exist as a thing, right? The Bible is a collection of books after the fact. And so it's kind of weird to think of to say, well, it has to be from outside of the Bible. And it's like, well, you do realize that over the last, I shouldn't say the last 2,000 years, but over the course of, a few hundred years, the early church fathers were deciding what should be considered part of this thing called the Bible. And it wasn't because they were writing them in real time. they were
Right.
going and finding books after the fact and going, everything in this book fits what we want to talk about and have in this thing called the Bible. So that's a point I think that's worth it's just kind of
I,
putting a pin in to think about, right?
so I think that scholars that say I think they say just that, Matt. I think they say that there are religious folks, monks, maybe they don't know who wrote it, right? And the fact that it one was written after the other, and many say they even use one of those
As
gospels,
source
Mark,
material for
as
the other.
source material
Sure.
for the other, and then you're writing to different audiences, such as Jews with Matthew and Gentiles with Luke,
Mm-hmm.
that's exactly what happened. What are you doing? I'm writing the book for the Bible, dog.
Yeah. But it doesn't, first of all, it doesn't fit because then there wouldn't be inconsistencies across the synoptic gospels.
Well, to this particular discussion though, like we can let's grant as much to the skeptic as possible. Let's say fine, the gospels aren't admissible. Those aren't
Sure.
historical. I don't believe that. That's a terrible that's a wild misrepresentation of the facts. That's a late 19th century, early 20th century, totally outdated paradigm of scholarship, which we can get into, but it's also totally irrelevant because my argument isn't depending on the Gospels.
Okay.
And to Dre's point, fine, let's say that Paul was a fraud. Let's pretend for the sake of argument, and I'm not going to leave it here. I'm going to revisit this, but let's say for the sake of argument that Paul contradicts himself when he says in Galatians, nobody told me this except for Jesus himself. In First Corinthians, he says, "What I received, I passed on as of first importance." Fine. Let's again, we can presume maximum skepticism here. We still have this historical data in the form of things like First Corinthians and the rest of his Paul's letters, where he says, "For what I received, I pass on to you as of first importance." And then he reminds them of the creed by which he initiated them and by which he says he was initiated, that the Messiah died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised again on the third day according to the scriptures, that he appeared to Cephas, Peter, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles. Last of all, he appeared to me also as the one abnormally born, for I am the least of the apostles and do not even deserve to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. And here's the kicker: whether then it was I or they, this is what we preached, and this is what you believed. And then he lays into them because some of them are denying the resurrection, the general resurrection. If the dead are not raised and Christ has not been raised, and if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile. You are still in your sins. Our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. But when he says whether then it was I or they, this is what we preached, and this is what you believed. So this is not just from Paul. This is from other people. Who are the they to whom he's referencing? Well, the they are Cephas, the 12 members of the 500, James, all of the apostles. They heard this initiatory creed not just from Paul, but from some of the people named in the creed, and you can get that from this passage on its own, but it's reinforced when you go back to the start of the letter. And Paul, after all of the greetings and salutations, I, Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus, sent to you guys, um, he immediately starts laying into them for forming cliques around which apostle or teacher had initiated them. It's reported to me by Chloe's people that there were quarrels among you. What I mean is, some of you say, I follow Paul, others, I follow Apollos, others, I follow Cephas, still others, I follow Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Were you baptized in the name of Paul? I thank God I didn't baptize any of you except Crispus and Gaius. Other than them, I don't remember if I baptized anyone. For God did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power, yet with the Spirit's power. And then he spends the next few chapters reiterating this, like it doesn't matter which of us initiated you, we're all teaching the same thing. It's the same message. We're all just workmen building on the foundation that is Christ. Um, so stop forming these cliques around which of us initiated you. And he mentions Cephas specifically as Peter, as one of the people who initiated them. And then in chapter 9, he makes an off the cuff remark about says, am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Am I not an apostle? Have I not seen Jesus our Lord? Yet he doesn't press his privileges and prerogatives as an apostle. And he makes an off the cuff remark about, do I not have the right to bring along a believing wife as do Cephas, Peter, and the Lord's brothers? And it's just kind of an aside through the course of pointing out that he doesn't take advantage of his prerogatives that he should enjoy as a prerogative, as the other apostles do, like Cephas and the Lord's brothers, which is a weird thing to say if they're not personally acquainted with Cephas and the Lord's brothers. So basically, from all of this, you can establish that at least Cephas, Peter, probably some others mentioned in the creed, members of Jesus' own immediate family were among those who had traveled around, visited at least Corinth, and initiated people with this creed. And when you look at the rest of the data about the early church, and you just ask the basic question of, well, what was the message? What were they converting people into? What were they preaching, and what was the message people were accepting that was Christianity? If no other option presents itself but that Jesus is the Messiah because he rose from the dead and he appeared to us. And that creed is the, and you know that based on the rest of what Paul says in that very chapter, but someone will ask, well, what kind of body will it be when it's raised? What, how are the dead raised, et cetera, et cetera. There'd be some cross-examining happening. Like if Peter shows up to Corinth and he initiates them into this creed, people are going to ask him questions. Well, what was that like? When, what did he say? What did he, how do you know it was him? These are the normal kinds of questions that you would expect if somebody says, my rabbi showed up alive again after he was crucified.
Right.
And like they were normal people like us who were inclined to ask those kinds of questions. And we see that in Paul's letter. And so that alone is sufficient historical data to prove that they were going around making this claim. And the nature of the claim was that it was repeated, it was collective, and it was empirical. Like that, it says that the Messiah appeared after he rose. He appeared to Cephas. It wasn't Cephas had a vision, and then the apostles had visions, and then the 500 had a vision. The appearances were something Jesus was doing. It's very much being described as an empirical experience that they had with their senses, and it was, and the result was they all reported the same experiences, the same set of instructions, which they all followed for the next 40 years of their life. There was no like the this the wording is different in different iterations of it, but the substance is the same. Go and make disciples of all nations. Go and bear witness to the resurrection. Go and spread the good news of the kingdom that the Messiah has come. The
Yeah,
resurrection was the proof of that.
I think that's a strong point coming out of this, right? First of all, just to back up, I did a couple of quick searches while you were talking, Brian. As far as Dre, to the question of extra biblical, right? I mean, there's a pretty decent list of historians, names
Contemporary
like,
ones?
well, Pliny the Younger, Tacitus, and Josephus are kind of the closest to
Right.
contemporary, right? So Josephus was born in 37 AD, and Tacitus in 56. So they're within a generation of just their life, right? Like they were alive when some of the disciples were still alive, right? Like barely, but like there's an
And
overlap there.
yeah,
Um,
do you have the Tacitus excerpt in
Tacitus.
front of you?
I do actually. So I'm just flipping through it, and I didn't know who he was. Just to be honest, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not a super history nerd, but this guy was a Roman senator, and he's widely considered to be the most to have the most detailed surviving information of early Rome, right? So his writings are
And
considered to
and
be like the ground truth of what was going on in early Roman time. He specifically what he said in his writings. I don't have the script, but this is just the paraphrasing. He says that he confirms that Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate, right? And then he says, but the movement broke out again. Like we killed this guy, and then like they came back up, and they're still talking about him.
well,
And
and he
that's
says that he was crucified for a mischievous superstition,
right.
and with Jesus' crucifix, with, well, he calls him Christus,
Hmm.
it's a slight corruption of Christos, which
Hmm.
is, obviously the Greek for Christ.
Sure.
But he says the mischievous superstition was checked for a moment, and thus broke out again not only in Judea, but basically spread across and reached Rome. Adding to your point about him, he was a Roman senator. He had access to, he was known for meticulously checking records,
Hmm.
and he had ample access to Roman documentation, and so he's highly credible as a historian
Yeah.
for that reason. Um, but the fact that he describes, this is kind of an aside to talking about the Great Fire of Rome, um, that happened in, I think, 63, 64 AD. Emperor Nero was blamed for it because he had all these plans to demolish large swaths of the city and build monuments to himself. So it was kind of something he was expected to do. So he used Christians as a scapegoat, they were extremely convenient for, because Tacitus describes them as a class. There are enough Christians in Rome 30 years later that they can be described as a class of people. I don't know how many people you have to be a class, but you need a lot. Um, and so that's kind of speaks to how fast and far the movement spread. They're a class hated for their abominations, so everybody was happy enough to accept them as scapegoats. And then in explaining who they are, they were named for Chrestus, who suffered the extreme penalty, who taught a mischievous superstition under Pontius Pilate. Um, which confirms the timing and that it was Pontius Pilate who was presided over Judea at the time.
Hmm.
Suffered the extreme penalty under Pontius Pilate. The mischievous superstition, thus checked for a moment, broke out again, and then when the Great Fire of Rome happened and Christians were scapegoated, it says that multitudes of them were put to death, according to the most exquisite tortures.
Yeah.
Um, so they were not large enough to be a class. There were multitudes of them that were killed. Yet Rome remained a major Christian population center even after the persecution. This is the time when according to church tradition, and I put it so loosely because there's not any extensive records of this, but this is when, according to church tradition, Peter and Paul and a lot of other prominent members of the early church were
Mary.
killed. Um, so the fact that you don't have any mention of this, and this is just, I'm kind of going off on a rabbit trail here. Bottom line is Tacitus confirms the general timeline that you get from the Book of Acts. He and without mentioning anyone by name, he explains why there's no mention of the martyrdoms of Paul or Peter or most of the rest of the apostles in the New Testament, because it hadn't happened yet. But if they're killed in the early 60s, that means the New Testament can't the most of the New Testament was written pretty early. But but yeah, so I think the more you dig into this, it's very easy to put to rest any dispute over the basic facts.
Well,
So
and just these other two, so Pliny the Younger and then Josephus, right? They both have a pretty strong
yeah,
hand in extra biblical historical evidence. Josephus was raised as a Jewish priest. He was raised in the rabbinical tradition amongst the Pharisees. He's essentially a Pharisee. He became a military leader as during one of the revolts, was captured by the Romans, and then found favor with one of the the senior leadership in Rome and took on their family name, and then just kind of became one of their personal historians,
The,
to write about the Jews. So you've got a guy that doesn't necessarily have any reason to be favorable to the Christians, right? Because they're now an offshoot of the traditional the Pharisees.
and he wasn't, by the way, he wasn't.
Right.
You're wrong.
Right. And in his reports, he reports that, the followers continued on after the crucifixion of Jesus. And he does mention that they say that Christ resurrected and appeared to them and whatnot. So I think that's, far as I can tell, that's the first non-biblical,
And it, and it,
secondhand
and a
historical
big
story.
line was he mentions James, the brother of Jesus, who is called Christ.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
There now skeptics will pounce on the Testimonium Flavium or whatever it's called, but
Yeah,
it's
Antiquities 18. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, they'll pounce on that as a Christian interpolation, like later Christian scribes wrote that in there, and that Josephus didn't originally write that. Um, they have a point, that they later Christian scribes did do that, but there's an Arabic translation of Josephus that preserves the original form before Christian scribes had and it wasn't that the scribes were lying, they just kind of added their own commentary. Um, but there's the basic facts in the version that Christian scribes interpolated. They have Josephus outright calling Jesus the Messiah, saying he was a doer of miracles, and if such a one can even be called a man. It's this very kind of lofty, obviously Christian, like it's something a Christian would say that Josephus would not have said. The Arabic version, which is earlier, preserves the basic facts without Josephus himself declaring him to be the Messiah. So yeah, so that's a that's a common set of objections that you'll hear when you
Yeah,
bring up Josephus, but they're answerable by the actual evidence. So
sure. Yeah. But I just wanted to point those out. I think it's worth mentioning in this conversation that, these non-Christian points of view existed. The other one that I was just pulling out was Pliny. So Pliny the Younger, another Roman senator, and his comments that he made is that they sing to Christ as God. So he's secondhand evidence that of the deity of Jesus. And then he pointed out that it's odd that they won't recant this story even as they're being executed. Right, so that's where we start with that part of that conversation of the idea to think that all of these people, and I kind of wanted to tie this, Brian, to what you were saying about the creeds and whatnot, because it's interesting that these people, in a time when they didn't have instantaneous communication, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have landlines, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have
You don't even have
essentially
a
anything
newspaper, right?
beyond snail mail. They were out largely telling the same story, right? And they weren't telling it in a way that brought more attention or focus on themselves, which is largely what one would expect to happen in a scenario like this, especially if people were inventing story for the sake of story, right? And I get it that this is where you start to get into, like, a logical person wouldn't expect, right? And of course the counter discussion is, yeah, well, a logical person wouldn't expect that somebody would defy the laws of physics and come back to life after being dead, et cetera, right? But at some point also, it's worth pointing out that when people say, did Jesus even exist? And obviously we have all of the Christian documents that show that, but then we're now showing Roman documents that prove it. There's more proof that Jesus existed as a human than there is that Julius Caesar existed as a human, right? And no one walks around arguing that Genghis Khan didn't really exist, or Julius Caesar really existed, or Marco Polo existed, or any historical figure from you know the first century. Like, at some point we have a natural sense of trusting historical documentation, except in this one instance.
yeah, and there are reasons for saying that. Like I I wouldn't put it as strongly as we have more evidence for Jesus than we do for Julius Caesar. Um, but I like I agree with your general point.
Yeah,
We there The people who say that they don't object on the basis of evidence. They object on the basis of philosophical prejudice. Um, there is since the Enlightenment, there was a basic presumption among historians and scholars that because we now know, based on the ideas of enlightenment, that God is dead. The belief in the supernatural is no longer tenable. Therefore, this figure that we read about in the New Testament, this Jesus Christ, could not have existed as he is described. Since there's no God, we know there's no miracles, there's no prophecy, so there are no prophets, there's no messiahs. This is obviously a work of fiction. So how do we, yet there had to have been in a historical Jesus. So how do we deal with that? How do we reconcile what we know, and put that in air quotes, what we know from the Enlightenment about the nature of the supernatural with the evidence? Well, there must have been this historical Jesus, but as stories spread about him after his crucifixion, there were the devotion of his disciples inflated him in their telling of the stories. That lent itself to legendary embellishment. So over time, these stories snowballed. So what started out as these relatively sedate stories about a faith healing apocalyptic preacher took on divine proportions by the time the Gospels were written. So now he's walking on water and claiming to be God and rising from the dead. That and people buy that because it sounds very plausible. It seems to accommodate their philosophical prejudices while accounting for the data, but only if you don't actually look at the data. If you just
Okay,
if
so we've established that these people did believe it because contemporary writers, or even a generation later, claim that they were dealing with all of these Christians who believe these things. But how do you explain the lack of historical data on all of what you just said, those embellishments of being of causing miracles or feeding multitudes or walking on water, when the only sources of that are the Gospels and these super devout people? Like there's like when you talk about Philo of Alexandria, I know he was far away, but if Jesus really did these gigantic things, perhaps Philo would have heard of him. Maybe Josephus would have wrote it, or maybe there's an incentive for Josephus not to write that. And same with Tacitus and the others. So why aren't the miracles and the multitudes and the people that he preached to and all of these big things that are in the gospel, why is there's no documentation other than the Bible that shows those things?
well, I think the extent to which people were writing things down is often wildly exaggerated in these questions. Um, they didn't have like a daily newspaper. They didn't have people like running around with notepads, writing things down as they happened. They were an oral dominant culture. They would pass these things on along orally. Um, Writing was actually a somewhat labor intensive process. People would, write short letters, but as far as writing, if you were inclined to if you were inclined to care about what Jesus was doing and you heard these stories and you believed them, you tended to become a Christian. Within the Christian church, these accounts existed as controlled traditions that were spoken by apostles. When you read about the role of apostles in the early church, when Paul is defending his status as an apostle, there's clearly some status attached to that, where and not just anybody could claim to be an apostle, claim to be a bearer of the Jesus stories. Um, Originally it was the 12, but we know that more people than just the 12 became to be known as apostles. But an apostle was someone who was an eyewitness to Jesus, and they would give these stories in oral form. And if you had a story to tell, if you were a legitimate eyewitness who, and which kind, the fact that this is the case, that it was that the status of, and role of an apostle was somewhat controlled. You couldn't just, if you claimed to be an apostle but weren't really qualified, you lost credibility. So they weren't eager to just accept anyone and everyone who wanted to tell the story about Jesus. You had to be kind of accredited within the community. You had to have been known to, like, somebody's got to vouch for you who knew Jesus. Um, People who were outside of that, of course, they knew about Jesus. It's actually much more telling that we have the what sources that we do have from non-Christians. What they aren't saying, they're confirming the general timeline that you find in the Bible. What they're not saying is, yeah, these Christians were just going around lying about their rabbi, claiming when you look at the nature of their claims about Jesus, they are they're public events. Appearing a a man who had been crucified and buried appearing to a crowd of 500 people, that's a public event. Claiming that the religious authorities who had him crucified were mad at him because he performed these spectacular public miracles. The nature of these claims, and that they involved public events, high profile, powerful public figures who had the ability to correct the record if it was wrong, yet you don't have any of these any recordings of these corrections. um they're inviting that kind of correction by the nature of their claims. The fact that we have only corroboration and no challenges to it is itself a pretty strong point in favor of Christianity. But what wasn't happening, there's all kinds of discussion about what meticulous record keepers the Romans were,
Hmm.
which is true when it comes to, logistical matters, administration. How many legionaries were stationed in such and such garrison, and how many bushels of wheat they needed to feed them, how many horses, that's the kind of stuff they kept records about. They weren't these meticulous historians and journalists as we think of them. But the fact that these were such public events, and if the apostles were lying or exaggerating about these high profile public figures, Caiaphas, Ananias, Pontius Pilate, Herod, Gamaliel, the Sanhedrin itself, and you don't have those people shouting them down as liars, that itself is significant.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that's a strong point. I in a to make an analogy to modern events. So when Mondani's wife was outed recently as having posted a bunch of hateful stuff in her social media, right? And she took it all down and she deleted it. And the spin was Mondani came out and said, "Look, she's not a public figure. I am," and he basically just soft sold it, right? What he didn't say was she didn't say those things
yeah,
because she said those things, and and people can prove it. Just because it's been deleted, obviously we know the internet lives forever. And I made that comment to somebody on the internet. They were like, "That's the dumbest explanation I've ever heard." I'm like, the first thing somebody says, your first response if somebody says something about you that's not true, is you go, "I didn't do that." Right? Or if you want to control it, you go, "That didn't happen." But if it did, you go, "Ah, okay, yeah, I guess that did happen. What else do we do?" So what do we say about it, right? And when you look at the way the Romans viewed what was going on in Judea, and as it made its way into Rome in the first century, second century, is they kept trying to shut it down, and it didn't work, right? Like that's the point that Pliny was making. He's like, they continue to make these claims up to their death. Like, why?
yeah,
Like
and
that's the real driver here. Is like,
for background, Pliny is writing to Emperor Trajan in
mhm,
the early second century.
mhm,
Um, the gist of his writing is like, hey, these Christians are here. I hate these people.
right.
They're like, no, like I don't know what their deal is.
We
I don't
thought the
I don't
Jews were bad. These guys, there's something.
but
There's something else.
but he's writing them to ask, like, I don't know what crime they're committing. I don't like them though. I don't like what they're doing. It seems bad. So yeah, I'll flog them and slap them around and stuff and tell them to knock it off. I don't know what they're really doing that's wrong though. Can you give me some guidance here?
Hmm.
And but for an example of some of the weird stuff they do, like they gather like the crack of dawn on Sundays and sing hymns to this Christ as if to a god. This guy was crucified, by the way.
By us.
But yeah, we killed this guy. Um, and so that lends itself to it's often, and to the option one part, did they lie about it? Um, when I said that you can prove from the evidence that they had neither motive nor means nor opportunity to lie about it. This kind of lends itself to that. Like they had this reputation to the Roman authorities as like we can't really like they're just like super nice to each other, and they swear these oaths to not commit any crime or to defraud anyone and to love their fellow man, but they're weird and it seems like there's something wrong with them. What do we do? Bottom line is being a Christian was risky from the start, and you get
Mhm.
that from Pliny the Younger. You get that from Tacitus, where Tacitus confirms that like Jesus, obviously Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem under Pontius Pilate at the behest of the Jewish authorities. Just on its face, showing up in the same city in which that happened a matter of weeks later, at the like really at the very next festival at Pentecost, and publicly proclaiming to those very people, "Hey, this guy that you, our rabbi that you crucified, he's actually the Messiah. You guys like really like screwed up here. You can repent and submit to him as Lord." Um, or you can be cast out into outer darkness when he returns. But he rose from the dead, and we're witnesses to this. That is a very, very, very good way of meeting with the same fate as Jesus.
Right.
Like if you want to get crucified, what you do to get crucified is you show up in the city where your leader was crucified, and you tell the people who did it, you crucified the Son of God.
Yeah, it's like that Archer's meme. Do you want ants? Because that's how you get ants. Like this is
Yeah,
like, do you want to get crucified? Because this is like number one in the playbook of how to get crucified is continue to talk about Jesus
yeah.
and rub the Roman fate nose in the fact that you think he's still alive.
Now, a lot of Christian apologists have somewhat unwisely, wildly overstated this, like in Josh McDowell's More Than a Carpenter, which I swear by. I have a box over there full of copies that I buy boxes of it so I can hand them out to people. I still vouch for the book, but there's a chapter where he basically claims that each of the apostles, save John, they were all like they were all martyred, and the way he frames it is like where they could have saved their lives at any moment by recanting.
Hmm.
That's a bit of an overstatement. We don't actually know how all of them died, and we certainly don't have enough data about their martyrdom to know that they had any option of saving themselves at any moment by recanting. But you don't really need to state it that way. The bottom line is they
They could have packed their stuff up and just headed home.
they had a very reasonable expectation of meeting with that same fate, which they
Yeah.
undertook. And they undertook that risk to be itinerant preachers. You say itinerant preacher today, and you might think of like
No,
a wealthy
hey Brian,
megachurch
no, no,
pastor.
no one says itinerant preacher today.
If one was inclined to say itinerant preacher or traveling
There
preacher,
you go.
you
There
might
you
think
go.
of like a mega a televangelist in a private jet going to stadiums and having people throw money at him, and he's wearing, he's driving a Rolls Royce and wearing a Rolex, and he's living a
You're
life of
thinking like
luxury.
righteous gemstones kind of stuff.
Right.
Right, that kind of thing. That was not the case at the time. People did not travel for fun and leisure in the first century.
Right. Nobody had air
Tra
miles and nobody
right.
had like, mega status with the hotels and the Ubers and
It was very arduous. It was risky. It was uncomfortable. It was not a life of luxury. So, like all the usual motivations people come up with, oh, well, people lie all the time, and you have the cult leaders, and um, lots of people, die for fanatical beliefs. Well, people die for like you have cult leaders who do it to amass power and wealth and women and basically to enrich and empower themselves. That was not the life of an itinerant preacher in the first century. You traveled around, you couldn't control the environment, you couldn't isolate your followers to exclude outside influences. Um, you pretty much you set up shop, you planted a church, you maybe led it for a couple of years, set up the leadership, then you got up and you started over somewhere else. And that these are the lives that they all led for the next 40 years on their belief that Jesus was resurrected. Um, it's not a very enticing prospect. That you
Especially
would,
if it's based on a lie. Like
yeah,
like full disclosure, I'm not sure I would do it today if I knew it was true. Like I feel like I would find some reason to wuss out. I'd be like, I mean, I got these things and like I got a bad leg and my allergies and
Especially
my
Paul.
my VA
What
rating.
like
Like I mean, I don't know, man.
what what incentive did Paul have whatsoever to
Being a
make this
Roman a
claim?
Roman Pharisee.
What incentive
yeah.
did he have to make this claim?
Yeah.
What does he get out of this?
I
He
wish I
spent a lot of
knew.
time in jail is what he got
Yeah.
out of it.
Right. So I mean, from the other side, like people, Paul was, let's say he's a liar.
Hmm.
Why?
Yeah.
What? Why? Why? And no one's ever been able to answer this for me. Like, why? Why is he a liar? Why would he do that?
Yeah, and I don't even know how to steel man that argument. Like I've never heard a good explanation for like I wish there was. So like I've been doing this so long. I long to hear a good argument against Christianity just for the just to have a good puzzle to solve. Um, there just aren't any. I sound like I wish we had like a hardcore skeptic who could come on the show and steelman this. I've never
We
encountered that.
we need to set up a debate between you, Brian, and Paulogia.
Okay. I
No, we who we need to get on is who's that freaking Twitch streamer?
Hassan Piker.
No. No, he's a younger he's a young he goes by one name, one word name.
A Destiny?
Yes. Yeah, we need Destiny on the show.
That
Yeah, I'm not
I
sure
think
he's a religious guy
he's
though.
not, and
He's not. That's the point.
he would literally piss me off. So I'm finding you, Destiny. Look into your webcam right now, Destiny. I'm coming for you. You piece of shit. Yeah, I
I don't
said
know
it.
when or
But
where.
yes.
Where's all this hatred for Destiny coming
You,
I
from?
you,
can't
you,
I
you,
can't
you
stand that
need to
dude.
watch him, Brian. You'd
I can't
understand.
stand that dude.
Like I
And
know who you're
I'll
talking
say that
about,
with my
and I
chest. I'll say it with my chest. F that dude.
all right.
So let's get back on track. So
Yeah.
I think we probably like let's circle back around, right? So I want
So
to
option one, I think
And real quick
we've
though, like a lot of skeptics will also talk about the gospels and the inconsistencies. And I gotta say that that's not the flex they think it is.
I think it makes it more valid.
I do
yeah.
too.
It's very good. And now this is somewhat separate from the specific case for the resurrection that I'm making, but it does come up later. Um, they tend to raise these issues as an when Christians say they're inerrant, that invites that kind
Hmm.
of a- as as inerrant uh, writings dictated by God Himself. If you're using that kind of an all or nothing standard, I'll freely grant that bringing up inconsistencies is the way to poke holes in that all or nothing standard. It does absolutely nothing to undermine the historical reliability of the Gospels. Um, it just shows they didn't get together to get their stories straight.
Right.
That these are independent attestations.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, um,
The same with there's like is there's a subtle inconsistency between like it's like I think First Kings and something else where they're talking about
Chronicles.
is it Chronicles where they're talking about like the number of troops that were ready to fight or something like that and the numbers
Yeah,
are
that's
subtly
that's
different.
that's where most of the
Yeah.
critiques come from by
Yeah.
and by writing two different accounts of the same
Yeah.
events, you're naturally inviting that kind of criticism. But
Yep. Yeah.
um,
So I like the I didn't know that there was this catchphrase, this Lewis's trilemma. Um, so either a liar, a lunatic, or what's the other one?
Lord,
Lord. But then there's also the other L Dre, that you brought up is the legend concept, right? Or maybe Ryan, you brought it up, right? So there's really four. That's the, if we were to
Well,
expand it. No, I mean, I think it's a fair addition, right? And this
I
kind of,
agree, but to sharpen that, dealing with the facts themselves that the claim was made
mhm.
by the disciples, you only have the three options:
Well,
lying,
but
delusional,
I
or
think legend holds up if you don't take into consideration the Josephus and Pliny and those extra biblical people, right? Like they kind of cut off the legend idea
well, the
because
argument from the
because legends take
skeptics.
time, right? And
Well,
this
but
is this is
the
one
steel man,
generation in first century Rome.
but to steel man that, with the Jesus mythicist argument, like in case you're not
Mhm.
familiar, the, it's just as it sounds. Jesus mythicists are people who think Jesus was a myth.
Mhm.
Didn't he's a totally fictional character.
He's King
They
Arthur.
Yeah, they will argue that Tacitus and Josephus and Pliny the Younger, they are not affirming the facts about Jesus as a historical person. They're only responding to the fact that there was this movement who was talking about him, and they were simply not investigating to debunk that he was a historical person. They were giving them the benefit of the doubt when in fact they were just talking about a spiritual being who was it who they historicized. That's the argument they would use. I don't think that argument holds up because again, if if they're historicizing a fictional character and they're involving all of these high profile public figures, and laying the blame at them for crucifying him, Caiaphas and Ananias and Pontius Pilate and
There
Felix
would be
Vestus
rebuttal
and all.
documents somewhere.
Yeah, they were, along with their bad reputation for being honest and unwilling to steal or defraud anyone or do anything else immoral. They would have a reputation
Hmm.
simply for being liars, and they didn't. They had the opposite
Yeah,
reputation.
yeah. No, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
But but to the fourth L as another option, again, that's not another option for dealing with the fact. It's an attempt to rewrite the fact,
Hmm.
because when you have like this idea that the stories we have about Jesus are the product of this telephone game style legendary embellishment. It started out as just a placebo effect driven faith healing ministry by an apocalyptic preacher, and it snowballed to these divine proportions through this anonymous retelling. Well, no, you have the earliest mention of him has him as the son, as God himself who rose from the dead. Like Paul, like there's very early hymns that Paul cites in Philippians 2, who being in very nature God did not consider equality with God a thing to be exploited, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore God exalted him and gave him the name to the highest place, and gave him the name that is above every name, that the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Paul is quoting that as a hymn that's already been institutionalized in the early church, and it has Jesus rising from the dead and being called Lord God. He's exalted to the status of God. That is a very high Christology at the very earliest mention. 1 Corinthians 15, this initiatory creed has him rising from the dead. If all of the earliest evidence has him rising from the dead and being worshiped as God, how do you embellish from there? It's that's simply that the evidence, the facts just don't fit that. And there's also the claim that like Mark, there's are you guys familiar with the two source hypothesis? Um, I'm not going to give a whole thing on it, but just for the listener's sake, I think you guys have heard it. I'm sure you guys have heard it before, that this won't be new information. But the two source hypothesis is that the synoptic gospels, Mark was written first, and there's another source called Q.
Q.
It's from the German Quell for source. And then because Matthew and Luke have material in common that's identical to Mark, they think that Matthew and Luke are dependent on Mark. They also have material in common with each other that's not in Mark, so they think it's dependent upon Q. And then there's material that they each have that's unique to themselves. So you have Mark and Q written first, and then Matthew and Luke after that, and then Acts. The earliest Mark could have been written was 70 AD because it has Jesus predicting the fall of the temple. Um, and the idea is that because Mark is the earliest, it has the lowest Christology, and then as time went on, Matthew and Luke had slightly higher Christology, and then John's Gospel had the highest Christology of all because they're outright identifying him as the Word made flesh in the opening in the prologue, and so this is cited to support this legend hypothesis. Problem with that is the very opening passage of Mark. There's all kinds of problems with the dating, by the way, which is might be another episode. But the opening passage of Mark, it has John the Baptist as the fulfillment of prophecy. Quotes the prophecy of Isaiah 40 about the messenger who prepares the way of the Lord. In Greek, it has him preparing the way of the Kyrios. Kyrios in Greek, it's the word translated Lord. It just on its own, it doesn't necessarily mean divinity. And so it kind of slips by most people, but it's quoting the Septuagint, which renders Kyrios for all appearances of the tetragrammaton of the divine name of Yahweh. So when you look at the original passage that's in Isaiah that's being quoted, the prophecy about the messenger, the voice in the wilderness, the messenger who prepares the way of Yahweh. Any first century Jew reading that would understand what's being quoted there, and that it's referring to the messenger preparing the way for Yahweh. John the Baptist was that messenger preparing the way for Jesus. So bottom line, um, Mark is outright calling Jesus Yahweh in the opening passage.
Well,
So
I agree, and there's not a but. I want to say this about what you just kind of high leveled. One, you talk about the two source hypothesis. For the listeners, this is important because this concept of the Q source is theoretical. There's not an actual document that anybody can point to. This is a theory based on the way that historians are trying to tear apart documents and go, well, because all the things Brian said, Mark first and then Luke, Matthew, like we think they were writing up based off of another document. Well, show us the document, right? Like one, there's never been, this thing's never come to light. One, right? So it's hypothetical. So even if it were true, like, what does it say? But the other thing to point out, Brian, as a question to you is, let's say what you just said about this Kyrios thing isn't true, and Mark just happens to have the lowest Christology of the Gospels. There's no gospel that has Jesus's corpse still laying in the tomb,
yeah,
right? Like,
that's
and the reason likely that those four Gospels were chosen, because for all we know, other disciples wrote Gospels also. The four Gospels, when you read them in collection, it's where you get the full picture of the Christology of Christ and the resurrection and his ascension and his return and all of those things. Like, it's almost like everybody got part of it right, and then the church fathers were like, these four knuckleheads got it the most right collectively, that everyone else will understand this.
Well,
Because my point is, if one of the Gospels told the whole story succinctly, they
yeah.
would have just given us one.
Well, to steelman that, the skeptics will point out that Mark doesn't report resurrection appearances in the earliest manuscripts,
Okay.
and so they'll argue that, well, therefore the resurrection, Mark doesn't report the resurrection. Um, well, Mark reports Jesus predicting his resurrection earlier. That the resurrection happened is taken for granted. You just don't get those
Right.
specific
Right.
accounts. And the skeptic would argue that, well, it wasn't, it was a spirit body that was raised. It wasn't. This is generally speaking from ignorance. I mean, the whole thing is speaking from ignorance. It's based on a paradigm that is long outdated. Um, when Jews spoke of resurrection, they meant bodily resurrection. That didn't have to be spelled out in a Jewish context. When you're reading it kind of, from the outside in and projecting Platonic metaphysics, then yeah, it would have been helpful if that had been more explicit. But if it had been, there, if it had been more explicit, they'd be arguing that, well, this is just Christian apologetics who are pushing back against this obvious criticism, and they would have invalidated it on those terms. But to your point about what the church fathers did with the Gospels, there wasn't really there was never really any debate about the Gospels being canonical. It was just they every time a church father, well, one, the church fathers never like got together and had a council to determine this. When you talk about church fathers, you're largely talking about the pre-ecumenical council period. You're talking about the people who were leading the church prior to the Constantinian shift. When Constantine legalized Christianity, they could come out from the shadows and they could do things like have church councils in the open without fear of being thrown in dungeons or crucified for it. So you never had this formal body convening to decide on these gospels from among other gospels. It's just that these gospels were always recognized as being the authoritative gospels. You had things like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Peter and stuff like that floating around in Gnostic circles, but they were never really on the table for consideration by the church at large. They were certainly never, and if they were certainly never competing with the four gospels we have. Every church father that mentions any gospels that were written down, it's always these four. But the most recent best scholarship, which I would uh, like Richard Bauckham's book Jesus and the Eyewitnesses came out in 2008. This is the best example of this, but he makes the somewhat obvious in hindsight case that what we have as the four gospels were simply the oral testimonies of the apostles themselves. The disciples were going around, and Papias of Hierapolis, he was a early second century bishop. He mentions who the writers of the four gospels and what their rationale was. He says, for instance, Mark was the interpreter of Peter. Peter probably knew some Greek, but he wasn't a fluent Greek speaker. So as he's traveling around the Mediterranean world, visiting synagogues, giving his testimony of Jesus, he's got Mark there to translate it into Greek for him. Mark's doing this over the years, so Mark's got it down pretty well. He probably doesn't need Peter for him to give the testimony. Having Peter there is important, of course, because he's the source of the information, and then the audiences could ask Peter questions afterwards.
I want to
But
I want to back up to Mark. Something else I
well,
want to point out. Hang on.
well, let me finish this point, and then
Okay.
but so the the early Christians had heard this from Mark himself with Peter there, heard it from Peter, probably asked Peter questions. So when the written gospel of Mark appears, even though Mark didn't sign his name and it's not set, it doesn't say from the memoirs of Peter on it, they already recognized this as what they had heard themselves in their own ears from Peter himself. So they didn't have these questions about authorship and authenticity. Those were already settled. And the same is true of of the rest of the content of the Gospels. This is stuff they already had from the eyewitnesses in oral form. Um, so they're like there wasn't really any controversy about it. But what were you going to say?
So I wanted to go back to Mark and his gospel being different with regards to the resurrection, because I really want to drive this point home that the early version of Mark, right, whether or not the early manuscripts were complete or not. So it ends in chapter 16, right? The end of that part of Mark is literally the angel saying, "Don't be alarmed. He has risen. He is not here." Right? And then the angel says, "He's going to Galilee. Go tell everybody and go see him in Galilee." Roll
Yeah.
credits. Like, that's how the book ends, quote unquote, with or without the secondary part of the. Like, that's a sick ending to a book if it's talking about what just happened. The fact that it doesn't speak to his, him returning and showing himself to the other disciples, whatever. Like, it didn't need to. Like, that's a better
Yeah.
ending if you were making a movie, right? Like, that's the ending of the boom, lights,
Well, and
house lights
what's
come on, right? Like,
what's more, if this is what Papias describes is Mark just writing down Peter's recollections in no particular order. Um, what's striking about the Gospels compared to the Creed and Acts, I mean, in First Corinthians, the Creed goes, the Messiah died for our sins according to the Scriptures. He was buried. He was raised again on the third day, and appeared to Cephas, appeared to Peter, and then the 12. Peter is and in Luke you have the disciples on the road to Emmaus saying, we heard from our women that he rose and he appeared to Peter. So you have these two sources of the New Testament that say he appeared first to Peter. We don't get that account. That's never reported on. It seems like based on the circumstances, Peter, whatever that encounter was, it was a painful experience for Peter, because he had denied him 3 times. We get his reinstatement in John's gospel, but I imagine, like, if you're approaching it from the position of a skeptic, um, if you think that they're just making these things up, well, if they're making it up, then it's weird that they didn't give any mention of what that appearance was to Peter. You don't have him telling anybody about that
that's
at
that's
any point.
that's a good point.
He's
But if
like,
it
yeah,
had,
I'll keep that to myself.
It had to be an interesting
He
conversation.
said some things to me.
He said some stuff.
but if we believe it happened, it's not difficult to surmise why that would be.
Yeah,
Um, it's probably a rough conversation with
yeah.
Peter.
Well, the other thing I've heard this. My pastor has said this, is that all of the Gospels, the 4 Gospels, view the resurrection as they're surprised, despite the fact that Jesus told them multiple times that this was going to happen.
Yeah, the
Like, they,
criterion of embarrassment.
yeah, and who is writing something after the fact and writing fiction and makes themselves look bad?
Yeah,
And like, why doesn't John, why doesn't he go, well, everybody else didn't think he was going to, but I did. I knew he was going to come back and I was right, or something like that.
and
You know,
John would say that.
that's my point. John, the
Of all the ones
competitive
that,
one, the one who Christ loved the most, right?
Yeah.
Because so, when there's that much, that level of personalism in these Gospels, why would they not have been a little more, self-assured? So we all just went back to see, because we were wondering, has he risen yet? Oh, he did. Look at that. Look at the time. Like, that doesn't happen, and that is a really peculiar component of these books as well. That they didn't expect it to happen, despite the fact that they should have. And then the other thing is, why weren't they camped out by his tomb? Why was it Mary and Mary that found the tomb empty? Right? Why wasn't Peter there? Why wasn't Peter just like,
I mean, if you're gonna make it up, right?
Especially if
Yeah.
you're going to make it
And
up.
if you're
Peter,
going to make it up, why would you have women be the first witness when no
100%.
one would believe them?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to return to my trilemma, um, would you say that we like I guess the three of us can safely eliminate option one? Um, that they lied about it. Like they gave every
I can like to me, I don't see how a person would hold to the idea that they were lying and that they all essentially, you know, went to their deaths untimely, early, uncomfortably, even
yeah.
you know in shame or being ostracized
Yeah.
to hold up
They
the
did
same lie, not a
they
lie, but the same lie.
they didn't have motive to lie about it because it didn't gain them anything that you could expect to gain by lying about such a thing. Um, and lying about such a thing wouldn't be a reasonable way to get the things that usually motivate people to lie. Um, they didn't have the opportunity to, like, the fact that they're involving high profile public figures and public events in their lives, well, they didn't have the opportunity to control the circumstances to sell that lie. Also, to speaking to means, when Paul says he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep, he's not, I don't think he's saying, so you can go check with any of these 500 people if you want, and they'll vouch for what I'm saying. To say something like that, I think he's this is already known. Like there are already hundreds of people who are already part of the movement vouching for this to whom he's referencing. And the question of is if you're going to lie about it, how do you leverage 500 people or enough people that you can get away with saying 500 people? How do you leverage them to go along with this? What do you offer them to get them to undertake this risk?
You would have to
How
ask
do you,
George Soros how you do it.
yeah. Well, George Soros had a lot of money. They didn't.
Right.
And all the money in the world ain't worth a lot if you get crucified. So, but it like I fully recognize how easy it is to win a debate when you're refereeing the debate, and I think we're all agreed on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
To the listeners, if you or anyone you know is a skeptic and wants to dispute these things, who wants to dispute my framing of the argument, wants to dispute my specific arguments, my specific facts, let us know. Like we would love to have someone to come on and
I think I'm going to have a taker on that.
yeah,
Yeah. So I've got a buddy of mine that I just talked to the other day, and he's looking forward to this episode. And he lives in a space of I want to believe, but it's funny. I categorized him as being in the Jordan Peterson camp
mm,
because he's a very smart guy, and he also understands that the day he says he believes in this, that he has to think and act, and his life is going to be different. And
yeah,
he's genuinely cautious because he doesn't want to do that flippantly, but is also afraid that he's potentially pushing it off out of for a bunch of other reasons. I don't want to put words in
yeah.
his mouth,
Uh,
but I'm excited for him to hear this. I hope that we didn't meander too much, and that and the points come through.
yeah, that and hey man, if you want to come on, you're more than welcome. I respect that. But I would also point to all the times in the Bible when Jesus preached the gospel, when the apostles did, there was always a sense of urgency about it. There was always today we talk about I was having this conversation with an atheist not too long ago, and I laid out the arguments, and he didn't have any objections. He's like, yeah, I don't know how to respond to that, but I just don't have faith. I just don't believe it. And I'm like, but why? Like, it's like you can see the facts, you can apply reason to where they lead logically. Why aren't you there? What's the barrier? Well, I just don't have faith. Every time the gospel is preached, well, we talk about faith as if it's something that just happens to you, that it's beyond your control or free will. every time the gospel is preached, they always exhort the audience to believe it. They don't appeal to blind faith. They make the case, they make the argument. Often there are miracles that are done right before them, or the apostles are giving their eyewitness testimony of Jesus having raised from the dead. But it always ends with them imploring them, save brothers, save yourselves from this corrupt generation. Therefore, let all Israel know for certain that God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. And the Greek for know for certain is gnosko asphaltos. Asphalt is where we get the word asphaltos is where we get the word asphalt. He's speaking of like know with this settled, concrete, set in stone certainty that God has made this Jesus, whom you crucified, both Lord and Messiah. So this is something you can know based on the evidence, but the answer to this is, well, after he said that, the audience says that they were cut to the heart by Peter's words and asked, brothers, what should we do? And Peter answered, repent and believe the good news and be baptized, and you will receive the gift of the promised Holy Spirit. Um, Bottom line is, if faith is not that we can give you the evidence, we can tell you what the truth is, and you can investigate it, verify it for yourself, falsify it, for whatever you can do. Apply reason, be skeptical, don't just suspend disbelief, make sure it's true. But you comes to a point where you got to do something about it. You don't just wait for faith to happen to you. You make a decision to put your faith in God on in the basis of that. You might not feel it. There's never a promise that he's gonna pull your heartstrings and drag you by your puppet strings across the finish line to faith. He gives you the evidence and gives you a decision to make. It is a choice that you make. It's not something that happens to you. So I'll just leave it at that for your consideration. But back to the argument, I think we've kind of exhausted option one. I think that we can logically eliminate that from consideration, which leads option two, were they somehow honestly mistaken about it? Is Jesus actually this very moment dead? Um, Died in 30 AD, never been alive since. But they were just somehow convinced that he rose. Is that is that something that you guys think is possible at least? If so, what scenario would produce that false belief?
I mean, the only part of it that I think could be possible would be the the two women coming back and saying that they saw a different guy in the tomb. You know, the women could have had a some kind of a hallucination from, you know, stress induced something or other. But then when they came back and got the others, and then they came, and then, you know, then the the follow on events, like to string them together is where it starts to
Like
be, it becomes less and less
like a
mathematically possible. Some
like
kind
a
of,
mass hysteria induced
yeah,
series of grief hallucinations.
right. That would have to be
Yeah.
like, it would have to be like contagious,
Yeah, that and
right?
that's
Like one group, I could see it happening to a group of two or three or five, right? Like, and they're all just kind of grief induced, and they haven't slept or whatever. That maybe they're fasting. It was right after the Sabbath, right? So maybe they super fasted and they're dehydrated and whatever.
and fasting is a part of mourning, which they would have been
Sure.
doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean that's possible in a single event, but then to string it, and then it happened again, and then it happened again, and then it happened again. Either they were all sharing some mushrooms that they didn't know they were eating, or one of them came up with a story, and then everybody just decided they didn't want to let him be the only one to do it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna unfortunately take a shot at our our Pentecostal brothers and sisters, right? And they were all speaking in tongues together because they didn't want to not be the one doing it.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty compelling explanation. Like it's plausible. Like
Yeah,
if I were a skeptic, that would like, and a lot of people like that's what Bart Ehrman thinks. That's
Or
what
maybe
Richard Carrier
maybe
thinks,
maybe
which
the scale of the belief, especially early, like days after or a couple of years after, is what is exaggerated. And by the time Paul is writing, and then by the time the Gospels are written, according to these historians, because right, it's post 70, that they just take that small group and just embellish it, and then it just moves on, and because it's been embellished, every time you read it, someone else reads it, they believe them by the story, and by that time it grows and it grows. It's like, the size of the fish that broke your reel, right?
now in the abstract, like if you like this is a very appealing explanation because it seems to account for the general story and it accommodates the prejudices we bring to it. We know resurrections don't happen. Something extraordinary must have happened. We know that people have we know that grief experiences are a thing. And that flies as long as you don't look at the specific historical data that this explanation has to account for. First of all, like the nature of the encounters. Well, I'll get to that in a second. But to your issue about the timing, Dre, well, we just quoted Tacitus, who said he didn't give an exact timeline, but the suggestion is um, Crestus suffered the extreme penalty under Pontius Pilate for his mischievous superstition that he preached, and it was thus checked for the moment, but then broke out again. I don't know if he says immediately or the Latin equivalent of immediately or whatever, but that the way that Tacitus frames it is that it was pretty brief. It was checked for the moment, and then it broke out again in the same place where Jesus was crucified. Um, for it
So,
to,
okay, I asked this. So before Jesus, there were several messiahs, and there was even
Mhm.
messiahs after Jesus.
Yeah.
What if this explanation, if just told to people, because they're just tired of their messiah losing. So, you know what? It's okay because this one was God, and he's actually coming back, and it's going to happen soon. So you better believe it. Kind of the Jehovah's Witness approach, right? The reason why they're so damn pushy is because the new paradise on earth and the apocalypse is happening any minute now. So you have got to get your mind right, and you've got to know in the correct things, or you're not going to make it to the paradise. So if you kind of frame it as, hey, the the Messiah was killed and that sucks, but there's good news about it. Isn't that easier to believe than every time we have a Messiah he loses and we don't have a real one and never comes?
Well, comparing Jesus to all those other messiahs, I think that the question or the question arises is that, well, why every time those messiah, well, for one thing, every one of those messiahs was leading a revolt.
Yeah, right.
It
Right.
was a military movement. They're gonna raise an army to overthrow Rome, and they typically got crucified for it. And then their followers, okay, well, if you're crucified, well, you're clearly definitionally not the Messiah. And so nobody claimed those messiahs rose from the dead. Because one, they weren't expecting a crucified Messiah. Two, and we
I
kind of
think that
missed
goes to
this
my point, though.
after,
I think that goes to that skeptic point
well,
where they finally believe that, okay, fine, this one rose from the dead. So,
um, Well, given that the pattern is to scatter and you just give up on messianic movements entirely, or go find a new Messiah, the question of like, I mean, you could, if the same people following those other messiahs that like latched on to Jesus and they were individually just so fatigued from losing messiahs, they refused on this one. Well, I don't think that's plausible on its face. You'd think that would just turn you off to messiah movements entirely if
Right.
they keep getting crucified. But these weren't like the same followers. Like what it really raises deeper questions of, well, what was it about Jesus that inspired such devotion that where every other messianic movement dissolved into nothing when its leader was crucified, what produced such devotion in his followers? Well, if you look at the sources, well, he like, why did he have a following at all? He did miracles.
Miracles, yeah.
It's not because they were so in love with his teachings. A lot of times his teachings were only for his disciples and the general public. They were there for the free lunches and the free healthcare. Um, so
Free healthcare.
the the fact that this movement persisted after his death is itself kind of lends itself to the argument. It doesn't undermine the resurrection claims. It says there was something distinct about Jesus, and it's also the fact that, you know, you had all these messianic movements that, and people were inclined to latch on to would-be messiahs if they're leading an army, if they're playing to type, if they're meeting the ex the expectations of a glamorous, glorious, powerful warrior that they wanted in a Messiah. This one was a teacher who was telling people to turn the other cheek and to love your enemies. How does that how does that inspire such a following in a culture that wants a warrior in the first place? And also 2000 years of familiarity has kind of blunted, like this is kind of a cliche that we like, citing it as a cliche kind of winds up blunting the 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 force of it. But the idea of a crucified Messiah is it was unthinkable. It was like saying a married bachelor or a square circle
Military
um,
intelligence.
or military intelligence. Messiahs, by definition, didn't get crucified. They
Right.
did the crucifying. They,
Saul didn't get crucified. David didn't get crucified,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Um, Messiahs were there for kicking ass and conquering and being the visible manifestation of God's glory,
What was
not to
the
be
line in
hum.
Breaking Bad? I'm not in danger. I'm the one that knocks.
I am the danger.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Messiah was supposed to be like a Jewish Caesar
Hmm.
who would be the light of God's glory on earth. Being crucified is the opposite of that. Um, so that's why all those other messianic movements scattered, which underscores this brings in more things that you have to explain about Jesus that defy natural explanation, not less things. Um, so but also to the general picture of the mass hysteria induced grief hallucinations. Again, that makes sense in the abstract if you're just sort of looking at it from a distance. When you look at the specific nature of the claims, though, of it being repeated, collective, and empirical, they all wound up hearing the same set of instructions that they all followed. You didn't have this early um, clash of personalities where they were all clamoring for control. They all went off to be itinerant preachers, none of them setting up a cult of personality around themselves. Not even Paul, contrary to popular misconception. He's going around saying things like, um, last of all, he appeared to me also as to one abnormally born. I'm the freak here, for I don't even deserve to be called an apostle, for I am the least of the apostles, because I persecuted the church of God. Um, he's constantly kind of downplaying his own role as an apostle, and but also um, kind of complaining that he's being dismissed as an apostle. Like he was he nor any of them were setting up these cults of personality around themselves. Which if it's all based on a grief hallucination, a hallucination is it's a sensory experience that's being manufactured by your own brain because of something awry. Maybe they all took the same hallucinogenic drugs and they were, by the power of suggestion, inclined to see a risen Jesus. But it would have been a risen Jesus who would have been accommodating to them individually.
Right. They would have certainly came out with wildly individually specific
Yeah,
recollections versus having a consolidated similar view. 100%.
yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah.
And so mass hallucinations, one, multimodal hallucinations, like most hallucinations are you either see something that's not there, or you hear something that's not there, or you feel something that's not there. Even like individual people who are just like pickled to the gills on hallucinogenic drugs, they don't often have multimodal, like multisensory hallucinations where they're hearing and seeing something that's not there. It's usually just one thing. They happen, but they're rare. Multiple people having multimodal hallucinations of the same thing, um, and with each feature that you add, it gets more and more implausible to the point where what you're describing is a miracle in itself. Lots of people having identical multimodal hallucinations where they all hear the same set of instructions. Well, now you're just be be serious. That's not a thing that happens. You have to, in order to maintain that, you have to ignore the actual data. It doesn't explain the data. Um, so I would contend that this is an option that particular attempt to establish option two, I think, can be safely eliminated. Um, what do you guys
Yep.
think?
I agree. I want to bring this back around and like I said, I want to keep putting this in front so we are saying the same things over and over again. Historical facts, Jesus existed. He was executed. And his movement didn't die when he was executed. It became bigger. Right? Like these are the facts. These are just
Yeah,
historical facts, third party. So then what the listener has to do is they have to ask themselves why. How/why. Right? How did the movement not die? Why did the movement not die? Why did it get bigger? Right? And then that's when you come back around to, well, either what you just said for the last 5 minutes, either everybody had the same hallucination at the same point in time, or they put the best lie together that they all held for 40-ish years into their deaths, and then everybody else bought into their lie. So either it was the coolest shenanigan ever pulled on the face of earth, or they all took the exact same best possible drugs together, or it actually happened.
Sick.
I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? Those are our options.
well, there are other scenarios proposed for option two that
I haven't ever heard one that was beyond the mass hysteria thing. I mean, that's
there's a,
really what
there's
it
a
comes down
couple.
to. Like what?
There's the swoon hypothesis. Have you heard of this one?
You use more words. I don't know.
Okay.
You love titles and catchphrases. I don't know. Like explain it, and then we'll tell you if you've heard
Well,
it
if
before.
it's somewhat it's somewhat widely discussed. I didn't want to like insult you
Come
if
on.
you knew about it, but it's the idea that Jesus didn't actually die. He was just unconscious, and the
So he
cool.
was not quite dead yet.
Yeah, he was only mostly dead. And being laid on in the cool stone.
I have heard this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, the being laid in the cool stone slab and the tomb kind of revived him, and he
So
um
so when he was beaten with a cat and nine tails that ripped his flesh off, he had a spear stuck through his abdomen, and he sat on a stick where he was asphyxiating and dehydrating and dying. Then putting him on a stone slab gave him a blood transfusion, cauterized his wounds, and gave him intravenous fluids. And
In 3080.
yeah,
Well, we can
I'm just trying to clarify the
we
swoon
can barely do
hypothesis.
that in 2026.
well
I watched The Pit on HBO.
well, and then he also moved the stone out
Right.
of the and somehow snuck past or subdued the guards.
He called
Maybe
down
they
the
were
power
drunk.
of he called down the power of Grayskull, turned into He-Man, rolled the stone away. Yeah.
Um, and then he appeared to the disciples, and this can
Then he
and
started playing hide and seek with the disciples.
yeah,
What a
that
kind of a dick.
hey, man, that's the
Yeah.
hypothesis.
Yeah, I've heard it.
So yeah, so I guess we're gonna eliminate that one.
Yeah, this,
You guys aren't
I
going
mean,
for that.
I mean, I love absurdity. So
You want to bat it around some more?
I mean,
Is
it
that
would make a cool like blasphemous like short.
right. It'd be like a funny
Yeah.
vet TV reel.
Right.
so? The other another scenario that's been proposed is the twin hypothesis.
All right.
Yep.
You see, Thomas, his name means twin,
Didymus.
In fact, it's
Didymus,
that's why he's Thomas Thomas.
right?
He's Didymus
Which
Didymus.
which clearly, obviously, proves that Jesus had a twin.
Obviously.
I mean, if there's a guy named Twin
Sure.
in his circle, who else's twin could it be but Jesus' twin?
It's a little on the nose, isn't it? Or maybe he had a
That's
twin
kind of
brother.
anti-Semitic, Dre.
That I'm so racist that it actually just comes from the bottom of my heart and I don't even know.
And so one of them was crucified,
Uh-huh.
probably Thomas.
Probably.
Judas kissed the wrong guy
Yep.
because he looked exactly like
Because
Jesus
Judas
because
couldn't
he's
tell the
his
difference.
twin.
Yeah.
It was
Because
dark,
everyone in the Middle East looks the same. So
but it was just, I mean, it was his twin, so that's an understandable mistake that Judas could have made. Um, so Thomas was crucified in his place. Jesus was fine. So when Jesus is showing up, they all think he was crucified. Therefore, that's why they legit believed he was crucified, but rose from the dead.
Yeah. Did he
And
go jab
so,
holes in his hands to show them his wounds so it looked
um,
like
well, no,
Thomas?
it was Thomas who was already crucified that actually doubted. So Thomas is dead. So that story that's the myth.
Hmm.
well, they just made that part up.
Oh,
I
oh,
mean,
if we're making up
that's
shit, like why
that's
not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's a late Christology
Right.
Okay.
addition to the story. Um, and so, like, if
I've watched The Chosen. He looks nothing like Jesus.
You know, I just think so. Okay, so they crucified our buddy. Jesus got away with one, right? And he could have scattered. And then he thinks, man, how can we take advantage of this moment? Right? He's from the Rahm Emanuel school of religion where you never let a crisis go to waste.
Never let
Right?
a crucifixion go. Go.
So, man, how can we take advantage of this crucifixion? I know it was prophesied that the Messiah would be crucified, and hell, that's me. They killed my brother. Prepare to die. Like I don't.
But it wasn't prophesied that a Messiah would die. Like Brian just covered that earlier, right? Like that was contrary to the prophecy, the
well,
way they saw it.
it was contrary to the expectation. I
Expectation of
think.
prophecy. Yeah, no, Psalm 22 and
But,
whatnot. No,
but we can spin this. We can spin it. We can
Yeah.
because I'm Peter, and I can spin a story, and my boy Mark's gonna give it to you in Greek.
yeah.
Well, my biggest problem with this is that now, if this was happening in like New York City in the 1970s, or any time since New York's been a city, yeah, that might be a plausible People have twins. It could be mistaken
A
identity.
doppelganger or something.
But the thing is, if Jesus had a twin brother, everyone knew he had a twin brother. Like it's not like they've been keeping him in a closet for 30 years and then they brought him out for
Bring,
Passover of 30 AD.
bring out the gimp
I almost
for
said that.
crucifixion.
Um,
It
like
puts the nails in its hands. Come on.
if he had a twin brother, everybody knew he had a twin brother. Um, and if there was a case of mistaken identity, it seems like they would have thought of that immediately. Like
Right.
if one of them was crucified and then the other one's showing up, they're going to think that like they're not going to leap to, oh, must be a resurrection. Um,
And if Tacitus, Josephus, or Pliny was gonna write something like, and by the way, the dude had a twin, so I
We're
mean
not
that's
even sure.
plausible.
Like,
So, I mean, homie had a twin.
and in case my sarcastic tone didn't come through because it was too subtle before, the idea that because Thomas's name means twin lends itself to he must have been Jesus's twin. That's obviously not a good argument. That's not like it. Yeah, I mean, it's the twin hypothesis. It's one of those things that if you think about it in the abstract, it makes a lot of sense until you realize that it- all of the facts mitigate against that. Like that's the first thing they would have thought of, and they couldn't have kept the fact that he had a twin brother a secret. Having a disciple named Twin is not a hidden clue that they're asking you to put together to decode to figure out that like if Thomas was Jesus' twin, you can be sure they would have said he's named that because he's Jesus' twin.
Does it really
Um,
mean twin or does it mean body double? I don't know. I can't.
I,
I mean, Matt's studying languages right now, so maybe there's a different spin.
it's going to be a while before I get into Greek.
Okay, good. Well, we'll wait. It's worth the
Yeah.
wait.
I'd be
but
like, guys, I got to tell you something.
but
It's body double. It means paid actor.
it seems like every proposed scenario to explain option two, how they could have sincerely believed the resurrection happened but been mistaken, it's more absurd than the last. You have to be really committed to not accepting option three for any of them to sound plausible. And they lied about it idea is all, like maybe you could combine them. Like one person lied about it and it planted the suggestion, but you still have the same problems of means, motive, and
Yeah,
opportunity.
we would have had to have
Um,
like a primitive mentalist, right, to be able to like walk around and plant all of these ideas in all of these people's heads.
and it would have to be somebody would have to be highly motivated to do that, to plan that at all, and have spectacular means and control of the environment to pull it off. Um, Much less to sustain it over 40 years to to turn this small sect of Judaism into a class that encompasses multitudes in cities like Rome. And Rome was not the only major population city, by the way, major population center for Christians. There were, Alexandria, Antioch, um, basically all the places Paul wrote to also had like major Christian populations. So um, every explanation for that fact that they made the claim, it seems to basically you have to leap into absurdity to avoid option three. But why are we avoiding option three? What do we know
Yeah.
about like how do you and
I
it
think
goes back to that.
that's the bottom line here. Like
Yeah.
I like to, for listeners, maybe this is your first time listening, Lee. Um, Brian and I tend to go at it pretty heavy on the show. And I like to, try to come at things a little direct. And sometimes I, cut through some of the more philosophical approaches to try to cut into the core meaning. And that's in this conversation. That's kind of where, Occam's razor is a fun thing to use when you're dealing with, well, is it this or that? And while to say, well, Matt, you're not going to tell me Occam's razor points to metaphysical, physical laws of, the universe being broken. Well, your other options are even worse, right? Like I restated earlier, we know the man existed. We know he was crucified. Here's the trick. His movement didn't die. It got bigger. It detonated. It exploded. It flourished. It bloomed. And the people with which it bloomed didn't say, we're just really devoted and we're going to carry on his message. No, they said he is still alive. He is risen. So then you've either got to say, back to the point of the 1, 2, or 3, right? Either they all lied, which you've got to jump through so many hoops to make that realistic that it doesn't make any sense. You can say that they were all mistaken, but then you're still stacking assumptions on top of assumptions. So then you're left with the most unbelievable of the options, but that's really where you're left. And then you've got to decide what you're going to do with that information. We can't win this argument for you, the listener, right? Like,
Well,
we can present the information and show you where the options fall apart and where they don't. But at the end of the day, the listener has to say, yeah, I'm kind of boxed into a corner now. Now I have to accept the most unbelievable thing possible.
um, but really the main question it brings us to this point of considering option three. Why is that so hard to believe? What do you know about reality? Like if you approach the question from a philosophically neutral standpoint, like if you're truly coming at it with an open mind, if you're not bringing committed biases with you to the question, obviously the only like it leads you to option three. God exists, he raised Jesus from the dead, he vindicated him as the Messiah, he validated the overall biblical narrative. That's the one redeeming thing about The Force Awakens, that the first of the Disney Star Wars movies, that's that scene with Han Solo when they're on the Millennium Falcon and they're asking him about the Jedi and Luke Skywalker, and he turns around and it's become a meme now. It's crazy thing about it is it's true. It's all true. Um, like that comes to mind when I consider this argument. Like you we have a normalcy bias that we apply to all of life because it's outside of our experience. Things like that, they seem incredible. Um, but our existence demands that our normalcy bias was wrong. All kinds of extraordinary things had to happen for us to even exist, for consciousness to exist, for humanity to have come about, for life to have come about, for the earth to exist as it is, for the Big Bang to happen. Our normalcy bias is simply wrong. This cuts through it and demands us to revisit it. If you can't accept option three, it goes back to that line that Simeon spoke to Mary in the temple, that this child is destined to cause the falling and rising of many in Israel, and to be a sign that will be spoken against, so that the thoughts of many hearts will be revealed. When you're confronted with the question of who Jesus Christ is, and specifically with which of these options explains the data before you, it reveals who you are and what you really believe. And if you can't accept it, it means that you're clinging to a falsehood. You're defining your identity, your very self, on something that is demonstrably false for the fact that you either cannot explain this data that's set before you, or you cannot accept where that data leads. There's something in you that's false and has to die. Um, and if that's not true, then the burden is on you to explain, well, why, how do you know God doesn't exist? How do you know that nothing does transcend nature? Um,
What's wrong with the answer we don't know? Because here we are coming up with all these trying scenarios to try to falsify one of the three options when there could be four or five options that we just couldn't come up with. We don't
um,
know. We don't know. Right? So what if there's an option, what if there's an option 2.5 or 3.5 and we just don't know what that is? Just because we can't explain or prove it wrong also doesn't mean that it exists.
Well, I think Brian opened the door to that, right? He made it the comment that he's had this
Now,
conversation so many
and,
times.
and
He's looking. He would love to have another argument that he
right.
hasn't. He
Well,
hasn't
I'm,
had
I'm
yet.
saying that us 2,000 years away aren't going to come up with it.
Well, I would also offer that 2,000 years has only given us three options. Like,
I,
you know what I
and
mean? Like,
and
there's been a
these
lot of
aren't
people that have
I,
said
I,
this isn't true,
well,
right?
and
or it's
and
not documented,
well,
or
but
because,
these,
right?
it's not that these options are what emerge from the data. These are the option. These options are logically encoded into reality
No,
itself.
no,
Again,
I get that. I
these
get
are
that.
the same three
I
options.
don't subscribe 100% to that though.
Okay, so what's a fourth option?
I just told you I don't know.
Well, but again,
And I just feel like saying you don't know is not a wrong answer.
I think it is.
Well, I know you do.
But I think it, well,
Because I don't have the
well,
answer means
I
that
want to
I'm wrong.
reiterate that this is not a Christianity specific thing. This is logically baked in to any claim ever about about an empirical experience. There are only these three options that apply to anything. There has never been a fourth option. It's like a law of geometry or mathematics. There are no four-sided triangles. There are the golden ratio
No,
holds throughout
no.
nature. This logical
If in fact that's a
calculus.
settled law.
Well, so I mean, Dre, I hang on. So Dre, I get where you're coming from. I've in some of our arguments, I've kind of said that, right? Like I've had that I've come up with that in the Trinity discussion, right? Why isn't it a quadrantry or a quintinitry, right? Like I get that part of it, but in this specifically, that's why when C.S. Lewis presented a trilemma, he laid it out and specifically said, "Come at me. If I didn't account for one of them, then some." And he published this, and he said, "I want the whole world to read this book, and I want the smartest people on the planet to come at me and tell me there's a fourth option." And nobody came forward with one, right? The closest is the legend, the which is
Right. Well,
it's
I mean,
ancillary to the other ones, right?
Which is a false option because it denies the facts.
Well,
It doesn't address the facts. It
and
bypasses
that's
them.
probably why it didn't hold up, right? And then
Yeah.
Lewis's trilemma still holds. But that's kind of the point is that if somebody has a fourth option and they present it, then it could be discussed. But until it's been presented, we have to act as if there's only three
sure.
because nobody's presented
Sure.
another option,
Sure.
right? Like, and I'm with you. You know, I love the I don't know answer, especially when it comes to things that are beyond, regular, belief. Our stupid little monkey brains can only understand
Sure.
so much, right? But this is one of those things where, we're in some combination, and Brian kind of said this, I'm saying it in different words, but, you don't have to believe this, but like you kind of have to explain why you don't, right? Or you can stick your head in the sand, obviously. Like
I don't think
nobody
it's head in
has
the
to
sand.
do
I don't think it's head in
anything.
the sand. It's like I don't buy it. I don't know why you have to have a reason.
But
Well-
because just otherwise you sound like a toddler. If you just go, yeah, I don't buy
I
it.
think all of us are fucking toddlers when it comes to this.
Well, but there's levels of toddlers.
Because there's
there's
math,
2-year-old
there's
toddlers
math,
and there's 4-year-old
dimensions.
toddlers.
We can't explain where Jesus went.
What do you mean?
He ascended. Where?
Well,
Where's that?
why
There,
is that central to this
there,
conversation?
Well,
there
no,
are
it's
higher,
central because we don't know. It's more things that we don't know.
there are higher spatial dimensions. Um,
Right.
that's where he ascended.
Is there a higher spatial dimension answer to this that we
Well,
don't know because we can't see it on our monkey brains?
the issue,
There's
the
math we can't see.
but that what this reveals, what this whole logical puzzle reveals about us as people is, well,
PS
why?
is I'm not saying this because that's what I believe.
Okay.
That's not how you use PS, but okay.
That's how I'm
Um,
using it.
well, PSS. Um, I'm not like, I'm glad you brought this up. I think that
Yeah.
is I think that is a great direction to take this. Um, but it is painful. It does confront us with that it 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 reveals the thoughts of our hearts. The question when that's somebody's answer is I just don't know. I just don't buy it. Well, why? Why are you so committed to not buying this that like you have to take this leap into absurdity? Like to say that there's a fourth option and like like an actual fourth option. This is the logical equivalent of saying there's a fourth primary color. Um, and I'm gonna remain colorblind until I can conceive of that fourth primary color when it doesn't exist. Why are you, and which raises the question of why are you so committed to rejecting this that you have to retreat into this and it really is kind of a faux humility.
Well,
It it presents itself as being this kind of this agnostic humility of I just don't know. But why don't you know? You have there is evidence before you and inescapable logic that points you to this conclusion that God exists and did this. This is
Oh, I think that
Jesus described this as the sign of Jonah. A wicked and adulterous generation asked for a sign. I tell you, no sign would be given it except the sign of Jonah. He's talking about his own resurrection. Paul talked about this as God has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to all men by raising from the dead. This is God. This is the when Jesus said, "I am the light of the world" in the context of the Feast of Tabernacles, or the Feast of Booths. They were commemorating their time in the wilderness, where they were led by God Himself as a pillar of fire and cloud. And He said, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but see the light of life." Jesus Himself in His resurrection is that pillar of fire in history that we can all look to and see that God exists. That's what this means. This is the scene at the end of the Matrix when Neo t- gets he talks to the machines on the telephone and says, I'm gonna step out and show these people what you don't want them to see." Um, Basically declares war on the machines, and then he takes off to flying on a crowded street to show everybody that there's a higher reality. They live in it. They live in a false reality. There's a higher reality that they don't know about, and this is him revealing it. That's what the resurrection is. God is calling us to recognize that. If you see that and your response is no, there's got to be some other explanation. Again, the question is put to you: why are you so committed to rejecting it that you're gonna take a leap into this void of agnosticism instead of following it where it leads?
oh yeah, I don't know.
Okay. So, and I think that's where it leaves us. And I think, and frankly, like I would go so far as to say that, I mean, we are all going to stand before the judgment seat of God, eh, in the future, and He's going to ask every single person, like, "Well, like I revealed myself to the world, to you. I sent." sent Brian and Matt and Dre to lay it out before you with mathematical precision, but you found more comfort in rejecting me. Why? What
And
was
we'll be behind him like this.
No, I'll be
God
like,
gave
no,
rock
I'm gonna
and
be like
roll
this.
to you.
What am I, a joke to you?
um but in all seriousness, like, all of the masks and pretenses and lies are going to be revealed, and in that moment, and everyone will wish, like, well, why didn't I just follow it through? Like, what is it that's so appealing about uncertainty and agnosticism? Why 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 am I so averse to answering God's invitation?
Well,
um
it's and the funny thing is
And why not go into Pascal's wager?
I mean, at worst case,
I
I mean that's a
uh,
terrible entry point, but at least it gets you over the hump.
yeah,
Like
I hate
that's
Pascal's
my thing.
wager.
I hate Pascal's wager as a starting point, but if it gets you in the room, then things can start to happen. You know what I mean? You can start taking it seriously once you're in the room. But you've got to, how are you going to hate from outside the club? You can't even get in. Like, you know what I mean? You didn't think I'd ever pull that into the show, did you? But, at some point, it's harder to explain it away than it is to just accept it and face it. And I think people get so wrapped up in wanting to explain it away. And I think that's kind of where you were going, Dre, with that, wait, there's got to be another option. I'm going to wait until I come up with another option because for some reason I feel like I'm in control. I feel like, if I can come up with a good gotcha, aha, then I'm smarter than you are. But this isn't about being smarter than somebody. It's not about, holding on to your preconceived notions. It's about saying like, when is enough enough? Like at what point, how many things have to be moved away for you to realize there's nothing left except the only option that makes sense and that's left that's reasonable, despite how extraordinary it sounds at face value.
And the typical atheist attack on Christians is, well, there's no evidence. Just show me some evidence for God and I'll believe. Well, here's the evidence. Here are facts that are incontrovertible. If you think I'm wrong, come at me. If they are controvertible, super easy to shut me up. Just show me how the facts are wrong. But if the fact is there, this is the logic, this is the inevitable, this is the absolutely unavoidable logical entailment of these facts. It leads to one of these three places. If you can eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. We can eliminate that they lied about it. We can eliminate that they were somehow honestly mistaken. The truth must be that Jesus rose from the dead. If you get to that point and you say, well, I just don't buy it, I don't know. Well, you were lying when you said, just show me the evidence. You don't there if there is evidence for God, I'd believe. No, here's the evidence and you're rejecting it. Your burden of evidence is as high as it needs to be for you to continue rejecting God, which means you're a liar. Like you're just rigging the game to ensure the outcome you want. And if you get to that point and you still reject it, well, there's nothing I can do for you. You can, but I can't take you serious. I can't give you the benefit of the doubt anymore that you are acting in good faith when you raise these discussions. Um, but if you come to that point and this is where you land, if I am going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you're still acting in good faith, but you still don't buy it, um, well, you must know something I don't. You must have some set of beliefs, some settled worldview that you're so confident in that you can reject that God exists, that you know for a fact that nothing transcends nature, God doesn't exist, there can be no miracles, there can be no divine intervention. What is that? What do you know that the rest of us don't, that you can rule that out? And if you don't have anything, then then you don't. You're making an emotional decision based on your hostility to God. It's not a rational decision, and
Oh,
you're no
okay.
longer acting in good faith.
Well, what if the I don't know isn't a fourth option? What if it's option two because we couldn't think of a scenario?
Um,
So your options all stay and they're logical, but just because
A new scenario that fits
I
into the second
I I
option.
can't debunk it because I wasn't there, there could have been a way that it grew even though only one person knew the truth or one person lied. Not all of them lied. Maybe it's option one. What if one dude's a liar and they all fell into the lie?
well, you still have the problem to solve about what's the motivation for the lie. But I would classify this scenario as the stage magician scenario, even if it's not literally a stage magician. Um, it's kind of the same puzzle. Um, David Copperfield made the Statue of Liberty disappear. That's an amazing thing if you can make the Statue of Liberty disappear. Um, David Blaine could levitate on street corners. Um, all kinds of stuff. The issue is though, we
Can you
do
prove that
have
David Blaine can't levitate on street corners?
yeah, I can.
You
I
know how he
can.
did it? You know how he did it?
I do know how he did it. But and that's kind of my
Breaking
point.
news.
We
Do, 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 do.
um I, I've done it myself before.
You levitated
Um,
on street corners?
I did, yeah.
Which we should burn you.
Um, I I didn't have the sample set or the time or the budget that David Blaine had, but I did it. Uh, but um, but my point of that is that we do have people like stage magicians who have done what seem like incredible magical feats. We also know that they are all illusory, because somebody at some point has leaked the illusion. Um, these we have precedent in all of these amazing things that defy explanation that eventually got explanations. Um, Yet in 2000 years, no explanation has been provided for this. Um, so what, like, again, when we consider all that, it really kind of pushes it back to the earlier thing of, um, I'm just more committed to not believing in God because there's not really a good explanation. The human mind is pretty clever. If somebody could figure out how to create that illusion, somebody could figure out how they did it. Um, and you're still left with the problem of, well, what's the motivation? Why would somebody, what would be the purpose of doing that in the first place? Is it more, and is that more plausible to believe that somebody would just decide as a sick joke, as a misguided attempt to start a new religion, a religion that teaches people to be radically, sacrificially honest and truthful, where bearing false witness about God is one of the worst things you can do, but it's predicated on bearing false witness about God. Is that more plausible to believe than that God exists? And if so, like, why would that be? Like, we're coming back to like the it's the psychological issue within the individual. It's not a true evaluation of the evidence and arguments. It's an avoidance of those. So,
All right. Yeah.
like,
Good.
um, but if I'm wrong, if there's a way you can if somebody's come up with a way to explain the illusion to establish that it was an illusion, I'm all ears. But in 2000 years, like the best anyone's been able to come up with are
Twin brother.
like yeah, something that
My
breaks science,
Jesus
that
Christ
demands
is Jason Bourne.
um yeah, the explanations that they've been able to come up with break science by proposing mass hallucinations. Um,
And if you're gonna
if
break science, why not just believe he rose from the dead?
Just go with
yeah,
the original version.
Yeah.
yeah, um, yeah, they all expose the lie that no, I'm too committed to science to believe in miracles. So here are these
That's
explanations.
so science is a miracle, you dumbass. It's a
Yeah.
schooner.
Um, so yeah, did we solve the resurrection?
I mean, we definitely took away all of the cop outs.
Yeah, and if we missed something, and if someone wants to come at us, we're come at me, bro. Let's fight.
We're here all day.
Bless you.
All
Dre
right.
was sneezing with
You,
it on mute
you have
for the people who
a
are just listening.
you have any final save rounds there, Brian?
Uh, I know I'm going to think of something brilliant as
Yeah, too
soon as we
late.
stop, but
Matt?
Um, the tomb was empty. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah. I'm right along the same ways. My friends have said history has given us crucified Jesus, empty tomb. It's transformed witnesses. It, it's not a myth, not a legend. Something happened. Um, and if you follow the evidence all the way to the edge, the most coherent conclusion is that Jesus didn't stay dead.
It's and like we're like it's kind of a big deal.
I,
It's the
I mean,
biggest deal.
huge,
Wes,
huge deal.
It's huge.
and
I
and
don't
Wes,
say it. Everybody else says it.
you can
They
ask
tell me,
anyone.
they tell me, sir, it's the big deal. So
It's
I
good
think we
news.
solved it. I think we solved it. It's good news. It's good news. First of all, it's good news.
It's good news.
And that's another thing. Like, this is good news.
Right.
So why don't you want that? Why
People
don't
are
you
so
want to be
angry
true?
about this. They're like, "Why are you angry?" Like you almost like really missed out, but you're not going to miss out now. So why are you so angry about it?
And most of the people that are inclined to hate Jesus or Christianity are people that claim they want the best for the world.
Right.
They
Yeah,
claim that humanity needs this or that, or we need to have
Hmm.
more justice
Compassion.
socially, and compassion and tolerance.
Yeah.
And and we're preaching all of these things right to your face, and you're rejecting it.
You know
So
what it is?
do you really want those things?
They hate us because they ain't us.
they
The chicks dig us and the guys want to be us.
Right.
the de
That's not
the,
Christianity. That's the
the
Marine Corps.
That's
Yeah.
thank you, Kurt Congleton. Thank you, Congleton.
but yeah, the devil is real. That's why people are angry about the resurrection.
Maybe.
They
Yeah,
um maybe.
maybe that's
Not
why.
maybe the devil's real. I'm saying maybe that's why they're so angry.
Well, yeah, we're at war.
Maybe it's because they have all them teeth and no
I,
toothbrush.
I was about to say that also. You beat me to it.
That's as good an explanation as mine.
I
That's
think I think so. So with that, I'm just
It's
gonna go ahead. I'm just gonna go ahead and say, stay curious, stay enlightened, and stop arguing in bad faith. God bless.